My name is Stephen Ashcroft. I'm 41, live in the northern suburbs of Seattle, and am a divorced father to Claire, my 15-year-old daughter who visits every other weekend. On the surface, my life looks stable, a solid job, a small house, enough to keep things moving. But beneath that are 7 years of relentless work, missed moments with Claire, and weekends spent answering emergency calls while everyone else lived theirs. I'm Director of Systems Architecture at Pathfinder Solutions. If a client's platform crashes at 3 a.m., I'm the one they call, the one who fixes it before anyone even knows there was a problem. I joined right after my divorce. Claire was 8. I needed income, health insurance, and proof I could provide. Pathfinder needed someone experienced, steady under pressure, and willing to adapt. I had all that, and one more thing. I was ready to sacrifice everything to prove I belonged. For 7 years, I never said no. I rebuilt failing infrastructures, managed furious clients after botched launches, trained every junior engineer. Once, I canceled Claire's 13th birthday dinner because a healthcare system went down during peak hours. She understood, but the look in her eyes haunted me for weeks. I told myself it would be worth it, that the extra hours, the unpaid work, the invisible fixes would eventually be seen. 18 months ago, when CTO Ronald Fletcher announced his retirement, CEO Scott Langford called me in. "You've done exceptional work," he said. "I believe you're ready for Fletcher's role. The board is supportive." I respected Scott. He was known for building companies where competence mattered more than connections. For the first time in years, I felt I was on the right path. He asked me to keep it quiet. I didn't tell anyone, not even Claire. I just worked harder, sharper, preparing for the role I thought I'd earned. Weeks turned into months. I was invited into executive strategy sessions, leading overhauls instead of just implementing them. Department heads praised my insights. I let myself believe, this is it. I remember the meeting like it was this morning. Leadership, senior managers, board members, all present. Everyone expected Scott to name Fletcher's successor. He gave me a small, reassuring nod. I straightened my collar, took a breath, and waited. I had no idea everything I believed in was about to shatter like glass under a hammer. Back then, I still thought hard work and loyalty would be rewarded, but life doesn't follow that logic. Sometimes, just as you're about to rise, someone quietly pulls the floor out from under you. If this is your first time here, hit subscribe so you never miss another powerful story, and let me know your thoughts on today's one in the comments. I read every message. The conference room that morning felt unnaturally still, the air thick, suffocating. Scott sat at the head of the table, expression unreadable. Fletcher shifted in his seat like he wanted to disappear. "After thorough consideration and unanimous board agreement," Scott said, "I'm pleased to announce Natalie Langford as our new CTO." I froze. Natalie, Scott's niece, who joined just 4 months earlier as his assistant, sat 4 chairs away. She blinked, feigned surprise, then stood like an actress accepting an award. "Natalie has shown remarkable vision," Scott said, hand on her shoulder. "She'll bring a fresh perspective. I hope you'll support her as you did Fletcher." Hesitant applause filled the room. I clapped too, reflexively. It felt like being punched in the face and told to smile. So I did. A thin, polite smile, the kind expected from someone who knows his place. She returned to her seat. Her eyes passed over me as if I were furniture. Scott kept talking, but I heard nothing. My mind replayed every late night, every crisis averted, every system I'd saved. All of it, erased, by one decision rooted not in merit, but in bloodline. The meeting dragged on for another 40 minutes. I sat motionless, not taking notes, not asking questions, just holding my face steady. When people finally began leaving, I stood up a little slower than usual. Ronald walked over and placed a hand on my shoulder. He didn't say a word, but his eyes said enough: sympathy, regret, maybe guilt. Then he let go, because he knew nothing he said could make it right. I packed my laptop and notebook. Out in the hallway, I saw Natalie laughing with a few people from operations. She looked radiant, confident, like she'd been waiting for this day all along. I walked past her without stopping. She didn't even look at me. Back at my desk, I opened my laptop, typed my password, and stared at the blank screen. My fingers hovered above the keys but didn't move. Everything in front of me blurred, not because I wanted to cry, but because my mind had gone strangely silent. Around me, keyboards clicked, phones rang, footsteps passed. The world kept spinning, completely indifferent to the fact that I had just been pushed aside. The afternoon drifted by in a haze. I went through the motions, answered a few emails, reviewed next week's deployment schedule, and sent out the quarterly architecture report. Everything was flawless, smooth, precise, just like the last 7 years. But one thing had changed, something I couldn't pretend not to see anymore. I no longer believed in this place. That evening, I came home earlier than usual. The Seattle sky was heavy with clouds, the kind that made everything feel gray. Claire was at her mother's house that week, so the silence in my home felt heavier than usual. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at nothing. How many moments with Claire had I missed? How many times had I promised myself I'd make it up to her later? But when exactly is later? That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. Every detail of that morning, replayed in my mind, the hesitant applause, Scott's satisfied expression, Natalie's smug little nod, Ronald's helpless look. I turned over, reached for my phone, and reopened the internal announcement email that had gone out earlier that afternoon. We are confident Natalie will continue Fletcher's legacy and lead the technology team into a new era. A new era. I turned off the screen, set the phone aside, and lay there in the dark. For the first time in a long while, I heard a voice in my head. Not the one that told me to be patient, not the one that said keep your head down. It was something else entirely. Maybe it was time to stop staying quiet. I arrived at the office early the next morning before sunrise. The building lights were still off, the hallway cold with the damp chill that rose from the concrete floors. I made a strong cup of coffee in the small kitchen and sat alone in the empty workspace. No one was there, only the soft hum of the ventilation and the faint glow of my computer screen coming to life. I didn't open my emails or check my meeting schedule. Instead, I opened a blank Word document and started typing. Not a report, not a memo, a resignation letter. Not because I wanted to give up, but because I wanted to take back control of my own story. Yet when I reached the words, "Dear Executive Board," my hand stopped. Something didn't feel right. Something was missing. I'd spent 7 years building everything here, the systems, the infrastructure, the client relationships. I couldn't just walk away quietly, leaving an empty chair behind as if I had never existed. I needed to know what my options were. I closed the file without saving and instead opened a spreadsheet, the list of strategic clients I had personally managed, names, contacts, technical preferences, even past emergencies and how I resolved them. I went through each line, and one thought took shape in my mind. They don't work with Pathfinder, they work with me. That truth wasn't new, but it was the first time I had allowed myself to face it. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. If I left, Pathfinder wouldn't just lose an employee, it would lose part of its backbone. And Natalie, the one they'd just handed everything to, had no idea how to hold it together. Right then, I made a decision. I wouldn't leave quietly. I would watch, I would wait, and when the time came, I would act. The following week stretched endlessly. On the surface, I worked as usual, coordinating server migrations for a healthcare provider in Oregon, fixing a critical authentication bug for a financial client in Vancouver. Natalie, meanwhile, started joining meetings, often arriving late and leaving early. She now had a personal assistant, a young man even less experienced than her, who took meticulous notes but never asked questions. Natalie didn't speak to me. She didn't acknowledge me in meetings either. Between us was a silence that said too much to be broken. Scott, on the other hand, seemed uneasy. I caught him watching me more than once from the hallway, studying my expression as if searching for cracks. One afternoon, he asked me into his office. "I know this isn't easy to accept," he said quietly. I just nodded. "The board thinks Natalie brings a new vision." "Vision doesn't replace experience," I said. It was the first time I'd allowed myself to be honest. Scott stayed silent for a long moment, then sighed. I don't agree with how this was handled, but I don't get the final say. I stood up. I understand. But I hope you also understand that I won't stay silent forever. He looked at me the way someone does when they've just heard a polite but serious warning. By next week, the cracks began to show. Natalie sent the wrong deployment schedule to a client in Portland, causing their entire platform to go offline for 6 hours. She blamed the development team, then the documentation. No one argued, but I knew the clients on the other side of those angry. Emails were starting to lose trust. A day later, Natalie held a full team meeting, opening with a speech about system innovation and modernization. I sat quietly at the end of the table, listening to her describe concepts she'd never actually implemented. Then, she announced she would be adjusting a few roles to align with the new vision. I was removed from the client relations group. In exchange, I was offered an internal advisory role on legacy system maintenance. The title sounded like a system scheduled for deletion. That night, I sat in front of my computer for 3 hours. I rewrote the resignation letter, but this time, I didn't save it. I sent it directly to Scott, copying Ronald and the HR director. The subject line read, "Official notice from Stephen Ashcroft." In the letter, I thanked the company for 7 years of collaboration. I listed my achievements, initiatives, and systems. But I also wrote clearly, my departure is not out of disappointment. It is because I no longer believe that competence is valued as a key factor in this organization's growth. I ended the letter with one line: no anger, no defiance, just truth. I will leave the same way I have always worked, quietly, efficiently, and leaving a space large enough for someone to wonder why they didn't notice it sooner. I hit send at 4:56 on a Friday afternoon, 2 minutes before the system automatically sent out the company's weekly status reports. I shut down my computer, stood up, and felt an unfamiliar sense of calm. I knew my story wasn't over. I was only turning the page to a chapter I would write myself instead of waiting for someone else to decide how it should end. I didn't expect Scott to respond right away, and he didn't. Monday morning, I arrived at the office on time as usual. I didn't change my routine, didn't mention the email I'd sent, and didn't bring up the fact that I would be gone in 2 weeks. I wanted my last days at Pathfinder to pass quietly, but not invisibly. Natalie acted as if nothing had happened. She smiled at everyone, moved from department to department with her assistant, taking charge of areas she still didn't truly understand. I began noticing a shift in people's eyes. The confidence they once had was fading, replaced by doubt, silent but unmistakable. That afternoon, as I prepared for my final architecture review meeting, Scott stopped by my desk. "Stephen, Scott wants to see you." I closed my laptop and stood. I knew this conversation would come sooner or later. Scott's office was on the top floor, with glass walls overlooking the city. When I walked in, he was standing by the window, a ceramic mug in hand. On his desk lay a printed copy of my resignation letter, marked up in blue ink. "What do you think you're doing?" he said without turning around, his voice calm but sharp enough to cut glass. I stayed silent. He set the mug down and turned to face me. His smile was gone. The warmth he displayed in leadership meetings had vanished, replaced by the cold authority of someone too accustomed to power. "Do you really believe walking away like this will shake us? That your absence will bring this system down?" I looked him straight in the eye. "I don't believe anything. I'm simply stepping away from a place that no longer fits." Scott moved closer, leaning on the desk. "Do you know what frustrates me most about people like you, Stephen? It's that quiet arrogance. You think because you're good at what you do, you get to challenge how things are run? This isn't a family. It's a business, and business needs fresh energy, people who can adapt to the times." "I understand," I said evenly, "but businesses also need competence, and that's no longer valued here." His expression darkened. "You're crossing a line." I didn't reply. The air between us grew heavy, but I knew I wasn't the one trembling in that room. "What do you plan to do after you leave?" he asked, his tone hardening. "Recruit our clients? Badmouth us to competitors?" "I plan to stay quiet," I said simply. but I won't stop anyone who decides for themselves who they want to work with." Scott gave a soft, humorless laugh. "Don't be naive. You have no right to take anyone with you. They're Pathfinder's property." I smiled faintly. "Then I hope you can keep them." I turned and walked out, leaving Scott by the window, his hand tightening around the mug. I knew the conversation hadn't changed his mind, but it had planted a seed of doubt, and that was enough. The next day, I began my final task at Pathfinder, the handover. I didn't do it half-heartedly. On the contrary, I documented everything with precision: the emergency recovery protocols, the client escalation workflows, the list of backup vendors capable of handling critical failures. Everything was organized, detailed, and clear, like a map only the creator could draw. But I didn't send it to Natalie. I sent it to Ronald, and only Ronald. "Thank you," he said quietly when he received it. "No one can replace you right away. They'll realize that soon enough." I nodded. "I don't need them to. I just hope they learn something from it. During my final days, I worked differently. I spent more time reconnecting with people from my old network, clients, vendors, and contractors, not to recruit them, to listen, and almost all of them asked the same question: 'Will you still be managing our account?' I only said, 'I'm considering a new direction. When I'm ready, I'll let you know.' Their reaction wasn't worry. It was anticipation. I felt as if I were standing at the edge of two worlds, one closing, one beginning to open. On my last day, I arrived early. I cleared my desk, deleted personal data, and took a moment to look around the office I'd spent 7 years building. Natalie didn't come to say goodbye. Scott never showed up. Ronald walked me to the door, shook my hand firmly, and said, "Good luck, Stephen, and don't let anyone underestimate you again." I smiled. I've learned my lesson. As I stepped out of the building, the late afternoon light spilled across the street, autumn leaves drifting in the wind. I didn't feel sad. Only light, not because I was leaving something behind, but because I had finally reclaimed something I hadn't realized I'd lost on my climb up the ladder, myself. I left Pathfinder on a Friday afternoon at the end of the month, just as the wind began to change. On the drive home, I didn't feel anything in particular. Not anger, not regret, not even the sense of relief I thought I would, just a strange emptiness, like slipping out of a coat that had been too tight for too long. That weekend, I did nothing. I didn't open my laptop. I didn't answer a single email. I picked up Claire from her mother's house, and we spent the entire day together, something we hadn't done in months. We went hiking at Discovery Park, and later we stopped for burgers at her favorite place from when she was in elementary school. For the first time in years, I was fully present with my daughter, not half listening while checking my phone or worrying about another server failure. "I like it when you're like this," Claire said as we watched the sunset over Puget Sound. I looked at her and smiled, but I didn't answer right away, because I knew this peace was temporary. I couldn't stay home forever. I needed a plan. Monday morning, I woke early, not to go to the office, but to start the next phase, rebuilding my career on my own terms. I opened my laptop and began listing everyone I had worked with, the relationships I had spent 7 years building. None of them were Pathfinder's property, no matter what Scott once claimed. They were people. They trusted me because I understood their systems, not because my name appeared under a company domain. I reached out to a few trusted contacts first: Julia from Evergreen Health Systems, Daniel from Redwood Technologies, and Aaron from the Washington State Procurement Division. I didn't ask for favors. Simply told them I had left Pathfinder and was exploring new opportunities. Their responses surprised me. "If you need a referral, I'm ready," Julia texted back almost instantly. "If you start something of your own, let me know." "I believe in how you work," Daniel wrote. Aaron called me directly. "Stephen, to be honest, we've been worried since Natalie showed up. The last time we worked with her, the deployment timeline and security protocols were both wrong. If you're planning to start something, I want to be your first client." I sat there for a long moment, not out of emotion, but because a quiet certainty was beginning to take shape inside me. They didn't want a company. They wanted reliability, and I was the one who had built that. I started sketching ideas for my own venture, a consulting and infrastructure coordination firm specializing in cloud solutions for mid-sized organizations. Not a giant corporation, but something agile, ethical, and grounded in competence. A business where I could choose my clients, design systems the right way, and work only with people who respected real ability. I called it Ridgeline Systems, a simple name, but one that carried both meanings. The ridge and the line, the foundation and the connection, exactly what I had always been in every system I managed. 3 weeks after leaving Pathfinder, I had a logo, a basic website, a professional domain, and, most importantly, a signed proposal from Evergreen Health worth $80,000. I hadn't expected it to happen that fast. Around the same time, news began reaching me from the old company. Natalie was struggling, projects were falling behind. Redwood Technologies, their largest partner, had just withdrawn from a key contract, citing lack of technical transparency. I knew exactly what that meant. It meant there was no one left capable of holding the system together. Ronald called me one afternoon. "Stephen," he said with quiet regret, "Scott's not doing well. The board's reviewing several of his recent appointments. Clients are starting to complain about Natalie directly." I didn't respond. Ronald hesitated, then asked, "Would you ever consider coming back if things change?" I looked out the window. The late sun filtered through red and orange leaves. "I've already stepped out, Ronald, and I think I'm on the right path." He sighed. "I understand, and I'm glad you are." After that call, I realized something I'd never allowed myself to believe before. I never needed Pathfinder as much as Pathfinder needed me. The loyalty I once gave them, steadfast, unquestioned, was never an obligation. It was a choice. And now, I'd made a new one. This time, I chose myself. When the first official contract with Evergreen Health was signed, I sat in front of the screen for a long time, not because of the money, but because of what it meant. I had just stepped through a door I could never go back through. Evergreen wasn't a small client. They had once been one of Pathfinder's top strategic partners, and now they were placing their full trust in me, the man who had walked away from Pathfinder without a word. I threw myself into the work with energy I thought I had lost. For 5 straight days, I barely left my desk except to take care of Claire when she visited. I audited Evergreen's entire cloud infrastructure, found 6 recurring vulnerabilities in their data access protocols, renegotiated with 2 vendors to build a failover system, and implemented a real-time monitoring dashboard. The same one Pathfinder had shelved for years because, as they said, the budget didn't allow it. When the project wrapped, Julia, Evergreen's operations director, called me late that night, her voice filled with genuine emotion. "Stephen, I don't even know how to thank you. We've never seen anyone handle a crisis with this much calm and precision." I smiled. "I used to do that every day for 7 years. No one ever noticed." "I noticed," she said, "and I'll make sure. Everyone else learns your name soon enough." After the call, I looked around my tiny workspace, a dining table turned desk, 1 laptop, a few notebooks, and a soft yellow lamp. Yet somehow, I felt more powerful than I ever had before. News about Ridgeline Systems began to spread. I hadn't announced anything or done a single thing to market it, but the people who had worked with me all those years at Pathfinder knew exactly who had kept things running smoothly. Daniel from Redwood was the second to reach out. "Stephen, let's be honest," he said on Zoom. "Since you left, Natalie's been trying to replace you. It's like someone brought a screwdriver to fix a server rack. Doesn't fit, doesn't work." I gave a small laugh. "I'm not here to speak badly about anyone, Daniel. You don't have to. The metrics speak for themselves. Deployments are delayed, clients are complaining, and the support system's a mess. I just filed a request to terminate our contract with them. But before I do, would you consider partnering with Redwood?" I thought for a few seconds. Redwood had once been untouchable when I was at Pathfinder. And now, "I'll send you a proposal," I said. 3 days later, the deal was signed. Within 2 months, Ridgeline had 4 more clients. I hired a part-time assistant, Owen, a recent graduate with sharp instincts and genuine curiosity. My small apartment gradually turned into a miniature operations hub, one wall covered in project timelines and system diagrams. Every morning I made coffee, opened my laptop, and found not orders from a boss but invitations from clients. It was a kind of freedom I hadn't known existed. Then, the news from Pathfinder began to roll in. Ronald called me for the third time in less than a month. This time, his voice carried real worry. Scott's been suspended. The board launched an internal audit. They're trying to figure out what went wrong. I could guess. You can't replace the one holding the structure together and expect it not to fall. Ronald told me Natalie was drowning in crisis. Their biggest client, Cascade Regional Hospital, had just terminated their contract, not just over operational failures, but because, as the report said, no qualified person could be found to take accountability. You know what they're thinking, right, Stephen? Ronald asked. That's the only person who couldn't be there anymore. He didn't argue. After a long pause, he added, some members of the board want to bring you back. Not to your old role, something higher, VP of Engineering. You'd have full authority to rebuild. I stayed quiet. A part of me had once dreamed of hearing those words, believing that if justice existed, Pathfinder would one day recognize my worth. But now that the moment had come, I realized I didn't need it anymore. I was done chasing recognition. I had built something of my own, on integrity, skill, and conscience. Things Pathfinder had long forgotten. Thank you, Ronald, I said softly, but I won't be coming back. He exhaled, not surprised. I figured as much. You've changed. Not changed. Just living honestly now. When the call ended, I stood and opened the window. Seattle's winter air was cold, but the sunlight still felt warm. I didn't need to go back to win. I didn't need revenge. Walking away had been the cleanest, most powerful move of all. And the irony was, Scott had always believed he controlled everything. But what he never could control was the real value of a person who finally decided to stand up and walk out. News of Pathfinder's instability began to appear quietly but unmistakably across industry forums. One article in Cloud Infrastructure Weekly ran the headline, Pathfinder loses 3 major partners in its first quarter, system failure or leadership crisis. I'm not someone who follows corporate drama, but I knew exactly where the truth lay. Scott hadn't been officially dismissed, but he was completely excluded from strategic meetings. As for Natalie, once celebrated as the future of Pathfinder, she had now become the target of every internal criticism, even from those who used to champion her. I heard most of this from Ronald, but there were things I could never have known until a message arrived. From Natalie. When I saw her name appear on my phone, I thought I was imagining it. I'd blocked her number the day I resigned to avoid any unnecessary theatrics, but this time, the message came from a personal email. Stephen, I know I have no right to ask, but if possible, I'd like to meet. Just once. There are things you should know. I didn't respond right away. I just stared at the words on the screen for over 10 minutes. Should I meet her? My instinct said yes. 3 days later, we met at a small cafe in Fremont, a quiet place where no one knew who we were. Natalie arrived first. She looked nothing like the confident young woman who once walked into Pathfinder as if she owned it. The dark circles under her eyes, the wrinkled jacket, the guarded expression. They told their own story. Thank you for coming, she began softly. Her voice was small, unsteady. I didn't respond. I sat down across from her and waited. I know you don't need to hear anything from me, Natalie said, staring into her untouched coffee. But I'm not here to defend myself. I just want to end things properly. I tilted my head slightly. I'm listening. She took a long breath. You know I'm Scott's niece. But what you don't know is the condition I had to accept to get hired at Pathfinder. I stayed silent. She said to me, you'll get the job, but you'll have to prove you can replace anyone, even my best. And that person was you. I wasn't surprised, but hearing it out loud still felt heavy. From the start, Natalie continued, I wasn't there to learn. I was there to eliminate you. Because if I didn't, there'd be no place for me. And you did it well, I said quietly, without bitterness. Natalie gave a faint, tired laugh. I thought I did, but then I realized I wasn't. As good as I believed. You weren't just skilled, you had people's trust. And that's something I could never fake. She looked up at me, for the first time without defiance. I destroyed everything, not because I wanted to, but because I never should have been given that power in the first place. But Scott doesn't accept failure, especially not when it comes from the person he handpicked to replace you. I still didn't know what to say. Natalie pulled a thin envelope from her bag and placed it on the table. These are copies of some internal emails, Natalie said, sliding an envelope across the table. They might help if Scott tries to sue you over clients leaving. They prove the losses were their failures, not yours. I took it. Didn't say thank you, she understood. Why are you doing this? I asked. She hesitated. Because I used to think I had to be like him to be respected. But you showed me the opposite, that a person can walk away quietly and that quiet can carry more weight than any fight. I left the cafe with a feeling I couldn't name. I didn't forgive her, but I no longer hated her. Everyone's shaped by the systems they're in. Not everyone has the courage to admit they were wrong. As for Scott, I knew he wouldn't go quietly. But I was no longer someone he could control. Now I had my own clients, my own team, my own voice. And for the first time, I could choose how to respond, to retaliate, or to keep building something no one could destroy. I chose to build. Because the deepest kind of revenge isn't reclaiming what was lost. It's creating something so solid, so true, that the past no longer has power over you. 6 months later, Ronald sent me a link. Pathfinder downsizes Pacific Northwest operations. Former CEO under investigation. I read it like it was someone else's story. Scott had been suspended, investors fled, the team unraveled piece by piece. Natalie's name wasn't Rising Talent anymore. She'd quietly enrolled in a master's program in systems engineering. I'd seen her weeks earlier at a tech conference in Portland. She approached me first. You've always been the person I measured myself against, even when I pretended otherwise, she said. She wasn't arrogant anymore, just calm, the kind that comes after facing your own reflection without flinching. Thank you for not exposing me, she added. You could have. Most would have. But your silence, it changed everything. I just smiled. Sometimes forgiveness doesn't need words. Back at Ridgeline's office, brighter, busier, but still grounded in respect and trust, I reminded myself, this didn't happen by luck. It happened because I walked away when staying would have been easier. Owen, my first hire, put it best over coffee one afternoon. You didn't win back your old title. You won yourself back. And that's the real victory. That night, I stepped onto my balcony, the Detroit December air cool against my skin. I thought of Scott, Natalie, all of it. Scott taught me that power built on favoritism always collapses. Natalie showed me that people can change when given a different example. And I learned that walking away from a place that no longer values you isn't failure, it's self-respect. My story doesn't end with fanfare, no revenge, no triumphant return. Just this. When everything fell apart, I didn't. I kept moving. I rebuilt, not to prove anyone wrong, but to remind myself I was always worth more. If you've ever been overlooked, underestimated, or told your loyalty didn't matter, you're not alone. Sometimes the bravest thing isn't to fight back. It's to walk away and build something true. Because the worth you've built quietly, day after day, no one can take that from you. You're not a victim. You're the author of your next chapter, and that, in itself, is victory enough.